We've been looking at what would Jesus teach. We have covered a number of things. He would teach us the importance of thinking, of trusting, of obeying, of serving, of growing, sharing, living in hope. And then last time we covered that Jesus would want us to be what? He would want us to be humble. And we looked at some reasons why Jesus would want us to be humble, how he took that child and taught his disciples what true greatness was like and what it was about. So that's what we covered last time. Going to listen to the text that we're going to study from Matthew chapter 25.
For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several ability. And straightway took his journey. Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same, and made them other 5 talents. And likewise he that had received 2 talents, he also gained other 2. But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth, and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants cometh and reckoneth with them. And so he that had received 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. His Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. He also that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents beside them. His Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. Then he which had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art an hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast that is thine. His Lord answered, and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gathered where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and at my coming I should have received mine own with usury. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it to him which hath 10 talents, for unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that he hath. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Today I would like to begin a discussion about Jesus would teach us that there's a need for us to be productive. And the parable that he just shared in Matthew chapter 25 outlines 5 different things about that productivity that I want us to notice this morning. But before we do that, let me just give a little bit of background in regard to this particular parable. First of all, it's during the final week of Jesus' physical life here on earth. He's going to be crucified soon, and so he's giving a number of lessons that kind of revolve around that reality. This particular parable is sandwiched in between 2 other parables. In the first part of Matthew chapter 25, Jesus gives the parable of what we typically call the 10 virgins. How that he, as the bridegroom, is going away Yet it's important for those who have been invited to the feast to stay ready for his return. So in essence, he's saying, my death is imminent, I'm going to depart, but you need to understand I'm coming back. And then in the end of chapter 25, Jesus outlines there the realities that when he comes back, he then will no longer hold the position of Savior, he will fill the position of judge. And he will be about the process of separating goat and sheep, faithful from unfaithful people. He will then judge those folks for eternity. In between those two parables is when he speaks what we're going to look at today, about our need to not only be ready as the 10 virgins, because we're going to be eventually judged, but our need to be productive in what we claim we believe. Our need to invest in what he has given us and to use it in his service. Just a quick word about talent. In this parable, Jesus isn't talking about personal gifts or expertise, although personal gifts and expertise are given. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 says the Spirit gives those gifts individually as he wills. So there are those gifts and talents. That's not disputed. However, that's not what Jesus is using in the parable, although that may well be part of the application. The talent that Jesus is talking about is also not just a specific coin, if you will. As a matter of fact, and there is always trouble with understanding the coinage and all of that of this period of time, but it appears that a talent was a weight rather than a coin. And so a talent of gold would be worth much more value, if you will, than a talent of copper. So apparently what Jesus is referencing here is a weight that has been given to these individuals by their master, by their Lord, before he departs. And they are responsible for the use of that value that he has left them with. So let's look at 5 things that I think Jesus teaches in this parable. The first one being this: closed minds and idle hands have no place in serving him. Closed minds and idle hands have no place in his service. When you read this parable, when you hear this parable discussed, which individual in the parable tends to get most focus? I think that the one-talent man seems to come to the center and rise to the top when we study this parable. The one-talent man, which forced me to ask, why is that happens? Why is it we read this parable and we focus on the one-talent individual? The other two actually are equally important in the parable, but our focus tends to go to this last guy. Is it because most of us identify with him more than the others? Is it because there's a sense in us that recognizes we may not be doing what God wants us to do with what God has given us? And so as a result of that, we, if you will, understand him a little bit more? Is it because of his fear? Is it because we approach our service with a sense of fear rather than a sense of devotion and love? Have we left certain spiritual things undone? And so that causes us to elevate this last man of one talent. How about the belief that that others ought to be doing more than they're doing? That may cause us to focus on the one-talent man, believing that there are 5-talent people who aren't investing what they've been given. Or might it be because it seems in our judgment that there are more folks just characterized by him? William Barclay said of the single-talent man that he represented the religionist of the day who wanted to keep everything as it was. They had no desire to take any kind of risk, to get out of a comfort zone, to expand their efforts so that God could bless them more. They just were satisfied with the status quo, and so they maintained that single talent. We must be careful, or we too can find ourselves putting a premium on closed minds who want no challenges. Fear leads some to not only bury talents, but their heads. Some appear only willing to undertake the things that they are convinced they can do without God's help. Folks, and that is perhaps one of the greatest hindrances to productivity in our lives that there is. That single fact. We're not going to start anything that we don't think we can succeed at. We are totally unwilling to put ourselves out there as the servants of God and let God use us. So mentally, if we don't see that we can conclude it, that we can do it, that we can accomplish it, then we're not going to start it. We're not going to start it. Folks, where's the faith in that? That's pretty much faith in self, isn't it? Matthew chapter 22, "Teacher, which is the greatest command in the law?" And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest command." You see, if I am the judge of what I can accomplish, where is my love for God? If I am going to establish what I'm going to get involved in based upon my understanding of being able to succeed, where is my soul? Where is my heart? So, secondly, we would notice in this parable that effort is more significant to God than his ability. Effort is more significant than ability. In the parable, we've got 5, 2, and a 1. That's the value that they have. But God didn't care about the value. What God cared about was their ability, what they chose to do with what he had given them. And this passage in Colossians, although written to slaves, I want you to notice how it basically says the same thing. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in what? The things that you want to do? Everything, and do it. Not only when their eye is on you to win their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Slaves, I want you to recognize you've been put in a position where you're supposed to serve another person. You do that wholeheartedly. Not just when they see you, even when they don't see you, you engage in that like you're doing it for God. Why? Because that's what God has invested in you. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working to the Lord, not for man. Since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward, it is the Lord Christ you are serving. Folks, and that's true of all of us. The same call that you and I need to do everything wholeheartedly with great productivity. God doesn't care about the value. He cares about our willingness to make ourselves available. And it is in effort. Success and proficiency come more likely. If you never try, you're not going to succeed. If you never give it an attempt, you're not going to be able to become proficient at something. So only in those things do we ever create any newness. Do we ever create any growth? Where there is no effort, then nothing can be achieved. Samuel Beckett, I like what he wrote. Ever tried? Ever failed? No matter. Try again. Fail again. Fail better. You see, God doesn't care about the success and failure. God cares about the willingness to serve. How about Thomas Edison? You've studied him, right? This poor guy, the teacher said he was too stupid to learn, that he shouldn't even be in public school. He was fired from his first 2 jobs for being non-productive. Took him 1,000 attempts before he was successful at the incandescent light bulb. And when a reporter asked him, how did it feel to fail 100 times? Edison's reply was, I didn't fail 1,000 times. The light bulb was an invention with 1,000 steps. You see, he was willing to put forth the ability, the attempt, and he eventually was rewarded. That's what God cares about. Thirdly, from this parable, we will notice that God is the only one judging what is acceptable effort. God is the only one who judges what is acceptable effort. Human expectations tend to evaluate success or failure based upon the premise of what they believe to be successful or failing. God evaluates devotion, dedication, and faithfulness much differently than humans do. The 2 and the 5 talent individuals are both rewarded equally. Equally. Why? Because the way God assessed their value and their effort was equal. All are not required to produce the same amounts to be pleasing to the Creator. However, each one was expected to do all that they could with what they had. When successful at that, God justly rewarded in accord with their faithfulness. God looks for willing effort, not for spiritual quotas. God doesn't say you have to have a quota. And yet some of us, that's how we approach our spiritual service to Him, as though, if I get my attendance mark checked and my star for being there, that's my quota. I've done my duty. Is that really the productivity God asks us about? Is that really the kind of service that God wants? God doesn't look for a spiritual quota. One's flesh may seek to impound the spirit in a prison of guilt, alleging that those with less talent can never produce the quality and the quantity of those who are more talented. Folks, there are too many Christians today who look at other people and say, I'm not gifted that way, I'm not valuable that way, therefore God expects less of me. That's the devil's teaching gone crazy. God has given every one of us the abilities that we have, and He expects us to use it. He does not intend for us to compare ourselves with others. The 1-talent man wasn't supposed to look at the 5-talent man and say, you know what, I've just got one, I can't do anything. He was supposed to use what God had given him. And yet many today, that's how they evaluate their spirituality, is by the comparison game. But from God's view, the supplier of all talents, the 1-talent man was not required to produce the same results as the 5-talent man. As I recognize, the older I get, that people's lives have different stages. I recognize that I think it's even possible at one point in life we may have 5 talents. At another point in life, we may have 1. The same person. I have witnessed people who have given their all, who take on a sense of guilt when a stage of life happens, perhaps health issues, perhaps just age, and now they can't do what they once did, as though God could somehow be unpleased with them. The reality is, God only expects of us what He knows we can do. It's not a matter of quota, it's a matter of willingness. And so, sometimes we need to recognize God just wants us to use what He's given. Next, faithfulness is rewarded with more work. Have you ever caught that in this parable? Faithfulness, investing, productivity is given a reward. Matthew 25, here's what we read first to the 5 and then to the 2-talent individual. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things, and I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. And then the 2-talent man. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Do you see what happens when you're faithful with a few things? Do you see what happens when you get productive? God gives you other areas in which to be productive. In charge. I would put you in charge as a compound word, means to come down and to stand. So here's what Jesus teaches in this parable. When you are a faithful servant being productive for me, the way you're going to get rewarded is not with rest, is not with time off. The way you're going to get rewarded for your faithfulness is I'm going to bring more stuff to come down and stand alongside of you for you now to produce additional things. And what's amazing is he says this new standing is going to be sharing in the master's happiness. Not a burden, not a punishment. If we get faithful with the things God has entrusted us with, His reward will be giving us new opportunities to be faithful to Him, and that, he says, is the joy of the master. when I read that and concentrated on that, it made me remember what was said of Jesus in Hebrews chapter 12, about how that we need to keep our eyes on him because he's the author and perfecter of our faith. But then it says that he endured the shame of the cross, and that he did that as a joy set before him. You see, Jesus was in the process of being faithful with what God had given him, the task God had given him. And what did God do? He put more by him. He stood more in front of Christ so he could be faithful again. And it kept growing and growing until it came to the cross. And God put a cross down. And Jesus said, I'm still going to do this, God, if it's your will. And he was faithful in doing that. And that's how the Hebrew writer can say that was joy, because he was engaged in doing the master's will, in enjoying his master's joy. Too often humans look at their at their reward, and we want our reward to be things like honor and recognition and praise and credit and something good on our resume, and brownie points. We want to be complimented. We want all of that to be our reward. The parable says spiritual rewards boil down to more opportunities for joyful spiritual service. That's our reward right now. Now, the Hebrew writer says there is a Sabbath rest. But it's not now, folks. It's not now. Now, when we're faithful, we get more opportunities to be faithful. And we should be joyful about that occasion. Next, this parable reveals that all people are blessed with some talent for which they will give an account. All people are blessed with some talent that they will give an account. Each talent-blessed individual in this parable was called to render an accounting of what they had done with what they were given. While there was diversity in what was received and in what was returned, there was a unison in the culpability and responsibility for what they had received from their master. Everyone was just as accountable. I think there's such a strange irony on the part of the one-talent man. The shovel-toting servant said, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you had not sown and gathering where you had not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. I knew you were a hard man. The original word means dry, hard, tough. It's from a root word that means parched. So everything that comes to mind by desert ground or dry Nebraska, summer. He said, I knew you were hard. But then he says that you harvest. You harvest. The root word from which that word harvest comes is thumos, from which we get our English word, all the words that have to do with thermo, heat, cool. So what it's talking about there is, I knew that you were hot. I knew that you represented heat, like summer, okay? You are hard, like the parched ground. But you want to harvest, because the summer has come, the heat has been given, and you're ready to gather in, to lead together the things that have been produced. And yet, that very concept of Christ led him to do nothing. That doesn't make sense, folks. It doesn't make sense, because doesn't it seem that should cause this servant to be more careful? Should he not have been more prudent about what he felt he was given? Would it not motivate him to be more productive if he was thinking, you're hard, you're wanting to harvest, you are gathering in, you're ready to bring it all together, so I better get busy? But it didn't do that. This servant knew all those things, but he was not faithful with what he had. And there's only one reason that's listed in Scripture. It's because he was afraid. He was afraid. He did not invest what God had given him so that he could be a productive model of what the master's servant was supposed to be, because he was afraid. And it was fear that led him to bury that talent. It was not the master's hardness which caused the man to be buried in nothingness. It was his own fear which nullified the master's blessing. Jesus, I think, would teach us today that we need to be faithfully productive. He would want us to know that closed minds and idle hands do not accomplish that. I think he would want us to know that effort is more significant than our ability. I think he would want us to know that we need to stop evaluating success and failure based upon human expectations, that God is the one who will judge what has been faithful. I think the parable also reveals that faithfulness is rewarded with more opportunities to engage in faithfulness. And then lastly, I think that Jesus would teach us today about productivity, that all of us, every one of us, will give an account for their blessing, what we have been given, how we have used it. Let's revisit this as we close. Of the 1 talent man, take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The 1 talent servant meets with such severe disappointment and condemnation. Look at what happened. First of all, he lost what he had. He lost what he had. You remember the passage in 1 Corinthians that sometimes we labor over in trying to comprehend. It says that each man is building, but each man's, what he's building, some are building of straw, and some are building of metals, and some are building of gold. Each man's, what he builds is going to be tested by fire, and some of it's going to be destroyed, but the man still be rewarded. You know, what this guy had didn't even get to the fire. He lost it. What God had given him, with which he could be productive, was removed from him. It was taken from him. He had nothing. He lost what he had. He was denied what he needed. The other 2 are told that they've been good, they've been faithful, that they're going to be given more opportunities to produce more and engage in that joy of their master. The 1 talent man was denied even what he needed. And he ends up receiving what he never envisioned: darkness, weeping, gnashing of teeth, misery. All because his productivity was buried in fear. As we think about the application of all that to us, our master has gone away on a journey. He's been gone for over 2,000, almost 2,000 years. He has invested in those that are his. He has given a variety of talents, value to each person. He does not expect us all to be the same, to accomplish the same things, to be able to do the same things. But he does expect all of us to be productive. So the question becomes, a question of eternal consequence. Are you being productive with what Jesus has supplied you? That's the question. Are you being productive with what Jesus has supplied to you? When you eventually meet again, when he and I are now face to face, how will he address me with what he has given me? Will I get to hear that I've been good and faithful? Will I get to hear what he talks about in the end of Matthew chapter 25? Enter into the joys of my kingdom. The thought for us to consider today: God has put something in me. Am I being productive with what he has given?